After our guitar comes out of the press, when it's been assembled with its top and its back, you can still see the overhang of the top and the back, as well as all the mortises and the braces lurking within, where we've tucked the braces through the kerfed lining and through the rim assembly. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to trim all this overhang off with a flush trimming router, and then we're going to smooth out the sides in preparation for binding. The binding is really the decorative trim work that's going to hide all of our woodworking joints here and also protect the guitar from any accidental bumps or dings. And it's also going to seal off the end grain and prevent moisture exchange and keep your guitar playing at the proper setup height through sealing off the end grain. Wood gains and loses moisture most readily through its end grain, which is why on our top of the line instruments we even go so far as to bind the sound hole to prevent any moisture exchange in the top, in the back, or to slow that down as much as possible. And also it's a decorative effect. Binding is largely decorative, but we put it on every instrument to protect it. First thing we've got to do to bind the guitar is we've got to trim away all the overhang, and then we're going to smooth out the instrument, inlay the tail strip here at the end of the guitar to cover up our seam here. And then we're going to route a series of rabbets around the instrument's edge. Rabbets are simply little channels that little stair-step channels we're going to put in with the hand router, into which we're going to glue our purfling and our binding that's going to become the protective decorative edging of our guitar. Here we have our gorgeous Cocobolo Rosewood C22, our designation for our sharp cutaway guitar. And we've got the rabbets routed into the guitar for our binding and our purfling that's going to go around the instrument and seal up all the end grain and protect our instrument. And here I've got some tortoise shell style binding and our black, white, black decorative purfling trim. Now this is a fairly austere, fairly simple purfling package, but it can get very complicated on masterclass instruments where there may be as many as 5 or 6 different pieces that we're putting in all simultaneously, which is why masterclass binding costs a lot more. But we're going to use a urethane type adhesive, and we're going to glue in our binding, and it's just held in place with what looks like masking tape, but this is actually a very strong, what we call flat back tape. We'll first put some glue in the channel for the purfling and the binding, and then we're going to glue in both the purfling and the binding simultaneously. Need a little bit of glue on the purfling as well. For those that are afraid of having messy hands, this job is not for you, as you tend to make a pretty good mess everywhere. And we'll go like this all the way around the whole instrument, taping in place our binding. It's one of the more strenuous jobs here at Breedlove on the hands, but it's also what creates that signature look that you're going to see on our instrument when we get around the whole thing with all of the tape. This binding is going to protect the instrument and really give it a nice decorative look. After the guitar has been bound and the glue is dried overnight, we're going to take the tape off, and then all the overhang, all the glue, everything that's left over, we're going to scrape off with a card scraper, and then we're ready to start final finishing the guitar. We're going to sand the guitar with 180 grit followed by 220 grit, and in some cases 400 grit before it's completely free of all sanding marks and ready to go over for final finishing. After taking the tape off this beautiful Northwest guitar of figured myrtle wood, we need to level out all the overhang of our purfling, our glue residue, and our walnut binding. So we're using a card scraper. It's a pretty primitive tool, but very effective for just smoothing down even highly figured hardwoods like this Oregon myrtle wood. And it quickly removes all the overhang and gets us to a point where we can start final finish sanding with about 180 grit. We can even use the card scraper to raise nice curls, nice shavings off of the instrument, reducing a lot of the sanding time. The scraper creates a really high luster finish that eases and speeds up the sanding process for us. After the guitars have been built, bound, scraped out, and sanded, they're at a finished state where they're ready to go over to the finish department. The last step is that we just need to check and make sure that the marrying of the neck to the body is going to go seamlessly. So every guitar is inspected for a critical aesthetic woodworking inspection at this point, and the fit of the neck is also checked at this point. The two parts are put together for the first time before they're going to be separated again for the entire finishing process until they get to final assembly. So after the critical woodworking inspection, we'll take the body and neck next door and we'll start the finishing process. Let's go check it out. The first steps in our finishing process are what we call wash coating, which is simply sealing off the wood grain before we apply our paste filler. Paste filler is a sort of peanut buttery substance. It actually looks like Nutella if you guys have ever eaten that hazelnut chocolate cream, but it's a real thick peanut buttery consistency, and what it's doing is it's filling in all the open pores in our open grain woods so that we can spray on a nice flat layer of lacquer after that. If we were to try to spray lacquer onto this East Indian rosewood, for example, the lacquer would continue to sink into the pores forever and we'd never get a really flat finish. So after applying this paste filler, Craig's just polishing off all the excess with these paper towels. He's going to let this dry for a day before he comes back and scrapes out with a razor blade by hand all the bindings, and then we put the guitar on the rack for actual spray finishing. Welcome to the high toxicity spray booth. We're inside the Breedlove spray booth. This is an automotive paint spray booth that we're using to apply our high gloss polyurethane lacquer. And Jay Jernigan's going to show us how he's going to put on a wet looking finish on top of these mandolins here. He's taking a mandolin off the rack, sticking it in our what we call a spray tree. They look like a giant lollipop at this point, but don't get too confused. They don't taste as good as a real lollipop. But first he's going to put a couple bands on the headblock region and then on the sides of the instrument, paying particular attention to the tail block area. After that, he's going to put a couple of bands of wet lacquer onto the sides. Once he gets the sides coated, he's going to put the mandolin back in the tree and spray the top and the back. See how the lacquer is just laying out like just a wet blanket on the top of this mandolin. This really high quality spray gun and high quality sprayer, that being Jay, is going to ensure that we're going to get a nice even film on every shot, and it's going to get a really consistent film thickness, keeping your instrument acoustically transparent. It's very important we keep the finish thin so that it sounds good. Jay's starting out with the end of the peg head, followed by the neck, shaft, and the back of the peg head. He's just trying to get an even coat of lacquer applied over the whole thing. We're going to have to do this to each part of the instrument 4 times per day, 3 times before the guitar is even ready for final buffing. A lot of work. So of the roughly 23 to 28 production days that it takes to complete a Breedlove guitar, guitars are going to spend roughly half their lifetime here in finish, getting no less than 14 separate applications of lacquer top coat, essentially. We actually use a catalyzed polyurethane finish, which provides exceptional sound clarity and keeps the finish really protective but thin and transparent, high gloss, and protective of the instrument. This is really when stuff starts to come alive in the finishing process. This piece of curly koa, for example, is really starting to shine underneath a couple layers of finish. That's kind of neat to see. The guys are going to take the guitars after they've been paste filled. They're going to take them into an automotive paint spray booth over there and start spraying lacquer on them. They're going to spray 4 shots in one day with an hour of gas off time between each shot. And then they're going to allow the guitars to cure overnight. After that, they're going to be hard enough to be sanded out. So they're going to take the guitars and sand them with 220 grit before they put them back on the rack, take them back in and spray them again. And they're going to repeat this process 3 or maybe 4 times, maybe even 5 or 6 times if it's a sunburst instrument, until the surface of the guitar is dead level, it's completely flat and smooth. Hopefully at the end of all this spraying, the thickness of the guitar finish is only going to be about as thick as a heavy sheet of cardstock, about 7/1000ths of an inch thick. So imagine that, a sheet of paper essentially that has taken as many as 15 or 16 different applications of lacquer to achieve. And then they're gonna take the guitar, they're gonna rub it out with 800, 1200 grit sandpaper, finally 2000 grit sandpaper, before they bring it over to these pedestal buffers here and bring it up to its super high gloss final finish. When Jason's done buffing, he's going to take this guitar through a series of different wheels with different coarseness compounds on them, and the guitar, when it's all done, is just going to look wet. It's going to look really, really, really high gloss, and hopefully we've achieved a finish that's better than any automotive finish out there. He's just on the first wheel, and you can already see how wet and alive this Koa guitar is starting to look. When we see it in its full high gloss glory, it's just going to be beautiful. This buffing process is like high stakes gambling. One slip, catch the wheel on the sound hole, and that guitar gets thrown to the floor, and even all the carpet and wrestling mats we have down there aren't going to save it necessarily. So it's a pretty stressful job. We're lucky we've got guys like Jason with nerves of steel and a really keen eye too to inspect these guitars and really show off what they're made of. Jay, can you show us that beautiful mother of pearl inlay and abalone border around the cedar top of this King Koa model? Pretty gorgeous stuff. Really nice work. You guys keep doing a great job.
Thanks, Jason.
Yeah. We're at the Breedlove Art Department, and right here Angela Adams is laying out all of the pieces of abalone and mother of pearl that she's going to need for a Breedlove mermaid pattern. So she's just assembling all the portions that you need. You can see parts for hair, the mermaid's upper torso, and she's really looking to find pieces of pearl that have the right chatoyance, the contrast and the luster, so that all the pieces look like they fit together and work harmoniously, artistically as a whole. The patterns in the mother of pearl and abalone are varied, as are the colors, and so finding pieces that match together is crucial in getting a piece of artwork that looks very congruent with itself.